A couple of years ago, a friend of mine bought me a book by Hans Rosling called Factfulness. And essentially, it's about data. I know that makes it sound really boring, but in fact, it was a fascinating book because his basic premise was that unless we know the facts, we can't make right decisions. So we all know that. But then he was a doctor and he did loads and loads of research. And what he discovered was that many of the major decision makers in the world, especially in countries where there's issues with healthcare, he discovered that these commercial bankers who were investing, government officials, leaders of health services, didn't know the facts. He used to do surveys with them, like multiple choice surveys, giving them basic things about gender or healthcare or the environment, and they had a choice of 4 answers. And most of them, most of the time, answered what they thought was true, that suppositions, maybe a bit of ignorance, prejudice. In fact, he proved that if a chimpanzee did the survey, because the chimpanzee just did it by chance, that often the chimpanzee got more answers right than these experts. That's quite an astonishing thing. I think it applies a little bit to our own lives too, in our own decision making, that we know we need to know the facts. And Jesus tells us in the gospel today about the truth. And we know tonight too that the governments are meeting with Boris Johnson to look at making some major decisions. And one of the reassuring things is they say that it will be based on the science, their decision making. And that's fine, but the science won't be the only truths placed on their table this evening. They'll also be getting truths from economists, maybe environmentalists, and others. And sometimes what these different truths want are different responses. So how do they make their decisions? If Jesus is the truth, it would be lovely to think that they would begin their meeting with a prayer. I don't think it probably happens that often in European politics, because what they do need is the light of his truth to shine on them, to show them the way, to direct them, to help them order their priorities. It's interesting in the Acts of the Apostles that the apostles were finding issues with so much going on and calls to help the poor, which they knew was really important, but then they had other things with healing and ministry. But they were guided by the lights of Jesus. His truth was what guided them. I think also that within that, there's a clarity that comes to us when we're disciples of Jesus because of purpose. That when we're ordering things in our lives, our purpose is love of God and love of each other. And sometimes, when we're making decisions, it's not always about government decisions, is it? It's about our own decisions in the local community, in our parish, in our families. That we also need the lights of his truth to show us the way. To show us the way. Is the way and the truth and the life. But in order to be shown that way, we too need to enter into a relationship with Jesus that allows us to see it. It's one of the interesting things I thought about Pope Francis when he started a number of years ago was in 2013, and he mentioned atheists, and he praised atheists, not for their conclusions, I might add, but he praised them for being seekers of the truth. People who were committed to finding the truth. And often he said, although we can't meet on the grounds of faith, we can meet on the grounds of good works, where so many atheists are attracted. But you know, in our own lives, we too need to be seekers of the truth. Sometimes, maybe like in Hans Rosling's book, we think because we've got faith, we can have our own suppositions about what it's about our purpose maybe, about what Jesus is calling us to, about what it means to be a disciple. But we need, every now and then, to review our lives and to ask ourselves, is the way I'm living, is what I believe, what the Lord is asking of me? We need to read the scriptures, and in the light of those scriptures, be directed in new ways in which to live our lives, because he's always renewing us, always challenging us. Jesus is not a truth that we can pick up in one lesson. He's an eternal truth that requires us constantly to be seeking him, and also to try to understand the way that he is calling us. The early Christians were called followers of the way, and of course we're the same, and the way of Jesus is what we're all called to follow. My final point is this. I was thinking about truth the other day, and I was reminded about, there's another way that true is sometimes used. When I started cycling, I used to go out with some friends, and one of my friends noticed that my wheel was buckled a little bit. And he's a bike mechanic. And so when we got back, he took it off. He said, "Your wheel isn't true." So he said, "I'm going to true the wheel for you now." Because the wheel was wobbling and deviating a little bit. So he tightened one spoke, replaced one, loosened another one, and made it run true again. And in our own lives, we can wobble a little bit. We can go off path. And we need to be made true. And only the Lord can really do that for us. Because if he is the way, the truth, and the life, as we so fervently believe, then we're called to be part of that way to show others. We're called to be truth ourselves, and we're called to fullness of life shared with him.